Welcome, dreamer, to Whispers of the Night, a place where stories drift like moonlight across the quiet corners of your mind. Tonight's tale is called The Unread Chapters of Forgotten Dreams. Before we begin, take a slow breath in and out. Let the day fade behind you like the closing of an old book. Every sound, every thought can rest now. You are safe here, surrounded by calm and softness. If you'd like more nights of stillness, more stories that lead you gently into sleep, make sure to subscribe to Whispers of the Night, so each new dream finds you the moment it's ready. This space is for you, a sanctuary of stories, whispers, and the art of drifting away. Now, settle in. Let your pillow cradle you. Feel the rhythm of your breathing slow, the gentle weight of the blanket anchoring you to peace. When you're ready, we'll begin our journey into the forgotten pages of dreams, where memories and imagination intertwine. Let your breathing slow. Inhale gently through your nose. Hold for a heartbeat. Exhale softly through your lips. Imagine yourself standing before an old attic door. The air smells faintly of wood and memory. You reach for the handle. It's cool beneath your fingers. As it opens, a warm golden light greets you. The space is quiet, filled with old books, faded paintings, and the hum of time itself. You move slowly across the wooden floorboards, your footsteps echoing like heartbeats in a distant dream. Each breath deepens your calm. Each blink carries you closer to stillness. There's a desk near the window. A single candle burns beside an open journal. Its pages shimmer faintly as if breathing. The words are soft, blurred, half awake, waiting to be read. You sit, you touch the page, and the story begins to unfold. You see images, soft and fluid, like reflections in water, forgotten faces, gentle laughter, the echo of lives long past. Each page carries you deeper into memory, but you are safe. You are merely drifting through stories that once dreamed themselves alive. The window glows with moonlight. Outside, the sea murmurs faintly below the cliffs. You can almost feel the ocean's breath mingling with your own. Let the rhythm of the waves steady you. Let the flicker of the candle remind you of warmth. Inhale and exhale. The journal's pages turn on their own now. Slowly, lovingly, you're not reading anymore. You're remembering. You're drifting through the fragments of dreams that never ended, the ones that lingered quietly, waiting for you to return. You feel your body grow heavier, your mind softer, the air around you warm and gentle. The candlelight fades to a deep, comforting glow. The journal closes itself. Outside, the stars lean closer. The night holds you like an old friend. And as you lie back in your bed, in the story, in the quiet between thoughts, you know that sleep is already arriving. Slowly, kindly, inevitably, drift with it. Drift deeper. The unread chapters will wait for you, always. The Unread Chapters of Forgotten Dreams. The whispering attic. The attic was a place she had always avoided, though she had no clear reason why. Its door, tucked away at the far end of the hallway, had always seemed to hum with a quiet, uninvited energy. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that filtered through the small, grimy window, and the air smelled of old wood, forgotten fabric, and a faint trace of something sweet, like the memory of a distant summer. She paused before the door, her hand hovering over the cold iron handle. The house was silent, except for the occasional groan of the floorboards far below, and she realized with a flicker of unease that she had never truly explored the attic since moving in. There had always been something in her mind that warned against it, an instinctive whisper that told her some places were better left untouched. But that evening, curiosity outweighed caution. The moment she turned the handle, the hinges protested with a long, low creak, and the door swung open to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling upwards. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and still, as if they were waiting for her. She stepped cautiously, her fingers brushing along the wooden railing, feeling the slight give of the boards beneath her feet. With each step, the light from the window grew fainter, swallowed by the heavy darkness, until she finally reached the top and pushed open the hatch. The attic unfolded before her like a room forgotten by time itself. Old trunks lined the walls, their leather cracked and brittle, and stacks of books teetered precariously, their spines faded and titles almost illegible. Cobwebs hung from the beams like pale veils, and in the center of it all, atop a small, dust-covered table, lay a journal. Its cover was dark, almost black, but the leather shimmered faintly in the dying light, as if it were absorbing the dim illumination and reflecting it back with a secret glow. She approached it slowly, each step stirring the dust and sending tiny particles floating in the air. The journal was heavier than she expected, and when she lifted it, she noticed how warm it felt, as if it had absorbed the life of the attic itself. She brushed her fingers across its surface, feeling the subtle texture of the leather and the faint embossed design that ran along its edges. It smelled faintly of old paper, vanilla, and something indefinably ancient. She opened it carefully, mindful of the brittle pages, and a small shiver ran down her spine as she glimpsed the first line. The handwriting was exquisite flowing, precise, yet full of emotion, like the thoughts of someone who had poured their entire being onto these pages. As she read, a strange sensation took hold of her, a gentle tug at the corners of her mind, as if the journal were speaking directly to her. The words seemed familiar, though she knew she had never read them before. There was a rhythm to them, a cadence that resonated deep within her chest, and for a moment she wondered if they were memories of her own, hidden beneath layers of forgotten dreams. One line, in particular, made her pause and stare. Some dreams are meant to stay unread. Her heart thumped against her ribs as she considered its meaning. What dreams? And why were they meant to remain untouched? She turned the pages slowly, each one revealing fragments of stories that were both strange and hauntingly beautiful. There were passages describing places she had never been, yet when she closed her eyes, she could see them clearly, the way sunlight streamed through the windows of a long-abandoned house, the scent of rain-soaked earth after a storm, the quiet murmur of voices in a room that no longer existed. It was as though the journal was a window into another world, one that existed parallel to her own, whispering secrets she was not meant to know. Hours passed without her noticing. The attic seemed to stretch endlessly, filled with shadows that moved slightly when she wasn't looking, and the small window cast a shifting light across the pages, making the words shimmer and dance. She felt herself drawn deeper into the journal, unable to resist the pull of its mysteries. There were sketches tucked between the pages, delicate drawings of landscapes and faces, each rendered with an almost obsessive attention to detail. The faces were unfamiliar, yet they seemed to watch her as she read, their eyes filled with longing, sorrow, or perhaps warning at one point. She noticed a loose photograph slipped between the pages. It was faded, sepia-toned, depicting a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, hair whipping in the wind, staring out over a vast, endless ocean. There was a sense of melancholy in the image, a quiet solitude that resonated with the feelings she had carried with her for as long as she could remember. She turned the photograph over and found a note, scrawled hastily on the back. Remember what was forgotten. The handwriting matched that of the journal, and an inexplicable chill ran through her. She felt as if the journal were not just a collection of stories, but a living entity, breathing with her, aware of her presence, urging her to remember something she had long since buried. She continued to read, and with each page, the lines between reality and imagination blurred further. Scenes unfolded in her mind with vivid clarity, a garden where the flowers bloomed in impossible colors, a library that stretched infinitely in every direction, corridors filled with doors that led to memories she could not name. Occasionally, a passage would make her gasp, describing emotions she had never felt or encounters with people she did not know. And yet, each felt profoundly intimate, as if the journal had been waiting for her specifically, choosing her to uncover these unread chapters. There was a sense of urgency to the writing, a quiet insistence that something must be discovered, something must be remembered. She noticed patterns emerging in the entries, certain phrases repeated, certain events mirrored, as if the journal were guiding her toward a purpose she could not yet understand. The attic itself seemed to respond. Shadows shifted when she looked away. The air felt heavier, warmer, and the dust motes swirled around her in a slow, deliberate dance. Sometimes she thought she heard whispers, soft and indistinct, like voices carried on the edge of memory. She would hold her breath, listening. But when she strained her ears, the sound would vanish, leaving only the whispering wind and the creaking wood. By the time night fell outside, the journal had completely ensnared her attention. She had forgotten the passage of hours, the chill in the attic, even the distant hum of the house settling around her. The stories she read began to feel like echoes of her own life, memories she could not claim, yet could not dismiss. There was a growing sense that the journal held answers to questions she hadn't yet formulated, truths about herself she had never dared confront. And with each turn of the fragile pages, a sense of unease crept into her chest, a mix of fear, anticipation, and longing, as though she were teetering on the edge of something profound and unknowable at one point. She paused to rest her eyes and noticed a faint reflection in the attic window. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw herself not quite as she was, but as she might have been in another life. The reflection smiled softly, an expression filled with knowledge and sorrow, and then vanished as if it had never been there. She blinked, her heart racing, and returned to the journal, feeling more certain than ever that she was meant to be here, meant to uncover what had been hidden for so long. She found herself reading a passage that described a hidden chamber, tucked away in the corner of a forgotten house, filled with journals, letters, and keepsakes. The description was so vivid that she could almost feel the cold stone beneath her fingers, smell the aged paper, and hear the whisper of wind through the cracks in the walls. A strange thought crossed her mind. Had the author of the journal once lived in her house? Had these memories been trapped in the attic, waiting for someone to find them, to awaken the dreams that had been left unread? The longer she read, the more the attic seemed to take on a life of its own. The shadows deepened, forming shapes that were almost recognizable, almost human. The light from the window flickered, as if in response to the stories, and the air seemed thick with anticipation. She felt herself shiver, not from cold, but from the weight of something immense and unknown pressing gently against her consciousness. She was no longer merely reading, she was participating, becoming part of the narrative. And the line between her thoughts and the words on the page blurred entirely. Finally, as the clock struck midnight, somewhere far below, she reached a passage that made her halt. The words were simple, yet they carried the force of a revelation. Some dreams are meant to stay unread, yet some will find their way to those who need them most. Her hands trembled slightly as she traced the letters with her fingers. She realized, with a mixture of fear and awe, that she had been chosen, perhaps unwittingly, to read these dreams, to uncover what had been hidden and forgotten. There was a responsibility now, a quiet urgency that pulsed through her veins. The journal was not just a collection of stories. It was a key, a guide, a living record of forgotten lives, waiting for someone to breathe life into the words once more. For a long moment, she simply sat in the attic, the journal open in her lap, absorbing the weight of what she had discovered. Outside, the wind whispered against the roof, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and distant earth. Inside, the shadows seemed to hold their breath, as though waiting for her to take the next step. She knew that her life had shifted irrevocably, that the attic, the journal, and the unread chapters of forgotten dreams would now shape her path in ways she could not yet comprehend. And though a part of her longed to close the book and retreat to the safety of ordinary life, another part urged her forward, deeper into the mystery, eager to uncover the stories that had waited so long to be told. By the time she finally rose to leave, the first hints of dawn were touching the horizon, casting a pale glow through the attic window. The journal remained open on the table, its pages still whispering secrets that only she could hear. She looked back once, feeling the pull of the stories behind her, and knew that she would return. The attic had revealed its first truths, but there were more, countless more, hidden within the unread chapters. Dreams that had waited in silence for decades now stirred, awakened by her presence, and she felt the weight of both wonder and responsibility settle upon her shoulders. As she descended, the journal clutched carefully to her chest. She realized that nothing in her life would ever feel ordinary again. The attic, with its dust and shadows, had become a portal, a threshold to something vast, mysterious, and profoundly alive. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, she felt the gentle whisper of the words echo once more. Some dreams are meant to stay unread. Only now she understood that she had been entrusted with the ones that could not remain silent. Shadows between pages. From the moment she opened the journal again, the world seemed to shift around her. The words on the pages no longer felt distant or abstract. They pressed against her awareness, resonating with a strange, almost tangible familiarity. At first, it was subtle. A phrase would echo in her mind long after she had read it, or a description of a room or a street would resurface unexpectedly in the corridors of her memory. She told herself it was coincidence, imagination, the natural weaving of thought and dream. Yet, day by day, those coincidences grew too precise, too detailed, too aligned to be mere happenstance. The first incident occurred as she sat at her small writing desk in the corner of her room. The journal spread open before her. She read a passage describing a glass vase, tall and delicate, sitting on a windowsill, catching the morning light and scattering it in prismatic patterns across the wooden floor. Moments later, her own eyes were drawn to the windowsill beside her desk. There, in the early sunlight, stood a vase nearly identical to the one in the journal. It had not been there the night before. She stared at it, heart thumping, fingers frozen mid-air. No one had placed it there. She did not remember owning it. The shadows of the room seemed to tighten, as though watching her reaction. And it was not just objects. Events began echoing to small but unnerving repetitions. A bird would tap at her window in exactly the way described in a passage. A line of poetry would come to her in the middle of breakfast, word for word. Even conversations she overheard, fragments of passing strangers' remarks, mirrored the dialogue she had just read. Each reflection felt like a nudge, a secret meant solely for her understanding, and each made the walls of reality sway, faintly but unmistakably. She began to notice the shifting of shadows, subtle movements at the periphery of her vision that could not be attributed to wind or passing clouds. A corner of the room darkened inexplicably, then returned to normal when she turned to look directly. The sensation of being observed settled over her gradually, a quiet tension in the muscles along her spine. Sometimes it felt like a presence behind her, heavy and patient, and yet whenever she turned, there was nothing, not a trace of movement, not a sound beyond the occasional creak of the floorboards or the sigh of the wind outside. Yet the feeling persisted. Shadows stretched differently when she entered a room, lingering too long, folding over themselves as if reluctant to return to their usual patterns. She had begun to imagine a figure watching from the corners of her memory, a ghostly observer who had always existed but had only now revealed itself. She tried to dismiss it as imagination. Surely, she told herself, the journal had simply unsettled her mind, drawing her into an elaborate daydream. And yet that explanation fell apart each time she glimpsed a reflection that did not belong to her, a shadow that moved contrary to the laws of light, or a phrase from the journal whispered softly in a voice she could not identify. One evening, she found herself tracing a line in the journal, describing a narrow cobblestone alley lit by lanterns that swayed with the wind. She had walked the streets of her own town countless times, but the next day, following a detour she had never considered before, she stumbled onto an alley that matched the description, exactly the same pattern of stones, the same lanterns flickering gently against the darkening sky. Her pulse raced, and she almost stumbled over the uneven stones as disbelief and wonder warred inside her. It was as though the journal had become a lens, revealing hidden threads that connected her life to a story written long before she was aware of it. She began carrying it with her everywhere, reading in cafes. With every reading, the lines between what had been written and what she experienced in waking life grew blurrier. Sometimes she would read a passage aloud, not realizing she had spoken it, only to find the words manifesting moments later in some minor but undeniable YA Noctober teacup. A stranger's passing remark, the sudden rustle of leaves in a pattern that matched a line of text. There were moments when she felt suspended in time, as if the world itself were bending around the journal's influence. She would glance at a shadow and think it belonged to someone familiar, yet when she turned fully, it dissolved into nothing, leaving the ordinary room behind. But the effect was cumulative. Each repeated echo made her more aware, more vigilant, more certain that she was being drawn into something far beyond her comprehension. She began keeping a small notebook, sketching shadows, writing down phrases, recording occurrences that mirrored the journal. The more she documented, the more intense the sense of a hidden figure watching her became. It was never overt. She never glimpsed more than a silhouette or a flicker of movement. Yet she knew it was there, waiting, patient, perhaps even guiding her. The days merged into nights in a slow, unsettling rhythm. Dreams she had once dismissed as ordinary now bled directly into her waking life. She dreamt of narrow staircases, twisting and folding impossibly in on themselves, and then found herself in her apartment moments later, noticing corners that seemed to echo the same shapes. She dreamt of vast, endless corridors, lined with doors she had never seen, only to discover a series of side streets and alleyways in her town that perfectly mirrored the paths of her dreams. Each night, her sleep was interrupted by fragments of the journal itself, the words spilling from her unconscious mind, rearranging themselves in patterns that sometimes terrified, sometimes enthralled her. It was during one such night that she first glimpsed the figure in a way that defied doubt. She awoke suddenly, the journal lying open on her chest, its pages fluttering despite the still air of her room. At the edge of her vision, a shadow shifted in a manner distinctly human. She froze, heart hammering, eyes straining to focus. The figure was there, standing just beyond the threshold of the doorway, faint and indistinct, yet undeniably present. It did not move toward her. It did not speak. It simply observed, its presence heavy and patient, and then slowly receded into the darkness as she blinked and focused. The room was empty once more, yet the impression lingered, the sense of being watched, of being drawn into something larger, of a story that was unfolding around her, not merely on the pages of the journal by morning. The incident had left a residue of unease in her mind. She realized that she could no longer read the journal casually, nor could she dismiss its influence. It demanded attention, demanded interaction, demanded recognition of the reality it was shaping. and yet she could not stop. There was a compulsion to continue, a magnetism in the words that pulled her ever deeper into the labyrinth of events they described. She began noticing patterns in the text phrases, repeated with slight variations, names that surfaced in dreams and in passing conversations, objects that appeared in the real world only after she read of them. Each discovery, each coincidence, each flicker of shadow confirmed that the boundary between her waking life and the journal's narrative was dissolving. She tried testing the limits of this strange connection. She would read a passage aloud, then watch closely to see if it manifested in reality. Sometimes it did, sometimes it did not, and the unpredictability only heightened her obsession. She began to track every manifestation, creating a map of occurrences, linking dream text and waking experience. The journal, she realized, was not static. It responded, subtly shifting its emphasis, guiding her awareness toward certain details, away from others. It was as though it knew her, or as though the author had anticipated her arrival, waiting decades for the right person to continue the narrative. The presence of the hidden figure became increasingly insistent. Sometimes she felt it close, and the air around her seemed to thicken. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, she thought she could hear it breathing, a soft exhalation like wind moving through trees. Shadows seemed to bend and stretch in her direction, lingering longer than physics would allow. She would catch glimpses of movement at the edge of her vision, an arm shifting, a head tilting, but whenever she turned, the space would be empty. There was no malice in its observation, only a patient, watchful insistence, as though the figure itself were part of the journal, an embodiment of the forgotten events and unread chapters it contained. Despite the tension, she felt a growing sense of intimacy with the journal. The words no longer seemed foreign. They resonated with her own thoughts and emotions. She realized that the experiences recorded within it were not just reflections of someone else's life. They were reflections of all lives, including her own, intertwined in ways that defied linear understanding. Each shadow, each coincidence, each subtle shift in the environment was a reminder that the world was layered, and that the journal offered a glimpse behind the veil. Even as the line between reality and dream blurred, she could not abandon the quest. Every page she turned promised insight, revelation, or at the very least, the thrill of the unknown. She began to anticipate the uncanny occurrences, feeling a strange comfort in the presence of the journal and the watching figure. It was as if the shadows themselves had become guides, whispering instructions she could not quite hear but instinctively understood. And through it all, she was aware of the profound, unsettling truth that some stories were alive, that some dreams were persistent, and that the world contained spaces she had never truly perceived until now. By the end of the week, her life had transformed. Ordinary events now seemed imbued with meaning. Minor coincidences took on significance, and the shadows around her moved with a deliberate rhythm. She could no longer read the journal casually, nor could she ignore the subtle presence that haunted her peripheral vision. Every day brought new reflections of the text into her waking life. Every night brought dreams that intertwined with reality in ways both thrilling and disquieting. The journal was no longer a book. It was a living force, a conduit between memory, imagination, and experience, guiding her toward an understanding she could not yet name. and though she could not see the figure clearly, though it remained just beyond the threshold of perception, she understood that it was patient. It was waiting, watching, shaping events in tandem with the journal, as if the unread chapters themselves were alive and seeking their reader. She felt the pull of those chapters deep within her, a magnetic force that promised revelation, transformation, and perhaps danger. The shadows between pages had begun to intertwine with her own life, and she knew that there was no turning back from the path the journal had set her upon. Forgotten faces. The dreams began quietly at first, slipping into the edges of her sleep like gentle whispers she almost failed to notice. They were fleeting, ephemeral, fragments of faces that appeared in the darkness behind her closed eyelids, lingering for a heartbeat before dissolving into shadows. At first, she dismissed them as echoes of the journal, her imagination spilling over into sleep. Yet with each passing night, the faces grew clearer, more insistent, demanding recognition in a way that made her wake with a tight, anxious heartbeat. She would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to commit each fleeting detail to memory: the curve of a jaw, the tilt of a mouth, the subtle arch of an eyebrow. But the images were slippery. Fading with the morning light, she began keeping a notebook by her bed, a ritual born of both necessity and obsession. Upon waking, she would sketch the faces she remembered, often starting with only vague impressions: an eye here, a line of hair there, a shape of a cheek that seemed familiar yet foreign. The more she drew, the more the features solidified, as if the act of recording them in ink made them real. Sometimes she wrote alongside her sketches, creating names, stories, and fragments of histories that seemed to belong to these strangers. She felt a strange urgency as she worked, as though the journal were compelling her to reconstruct lives that had been lost or hidden, lives that existed in a space between memory and imagination. The more she sketched, the more she noticed patterns in the faces. Some seemed familiar, though she could not place from where. They carried expressions of sorrow, longing, or quiet resignation. Emotions she recognized yet could not reconcile with any part of her own experience. Others bore features that were entirely foreign, yet when she dreamt of them again, she felt a strange kinship, a connection deeper than understanding. One recurring face was that of a young woman with eyes like storm clouds and a small, crooked smile that hinted at secrets she was not meant to know. She began to anticipate her appearance in dreams, wondering each night what story or memory would surface next. Then came the dream that shook her more profoundly than any before. She found herself standing in a long, dimly lit hall, lined with portraits hung crookedly on the walls. The air was thick with dust and a faint smell of decay. Yet there was something else, something sweet, almost floral, that clung to the edges of her awareness. At the end of the hall stood a figure, silhouetted against the faint light of a distant window. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that she had never seen before, yet it carried an overwhelming sense of recognition. The eyes were deep pools of sorrow, the mouth set in a line of quiet anguish. And then she understood, not with thought but with feeling. This was a tragedy that had been buried, a secret suppressed by time and memory, and she was somehow a witness to it. Now she awoke with a start, sweat beading on her forehead, heart pounding so fiercely that she feared it might burst from her chest. The face from the dream lingered in her vision, and she reached for her notebook instinctively, drawing furiously in the dim morning light. As her pen moved across the paper, the features became sharper, the emotion more palpable, until the figure seemed almost alive on the page. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized that the journal had brought her to this moment, not merely as a reader, but as a participant in a narrative that had never fully ended. In the days that followed, she noticed more echoes of the dream in her waking life. A street corner, a shop window, a passing stranger's expression, each seemed to resonate with the haunting sadness of that hidden tragedy. She began to suspect that the journal was not simply a collection of stories. It was a map guiding her toward something long forgotten, long concealed. She questioned whose memories these truly were. Could the journal belong to someone else entirely? A person whose life had been erased by time? Or was it a record of a past version of herself? A self she had never lived, but somehow carried within her subconscious. The more she explored the journal, the more disorienting it became. Names appeared and disappeared, locations shifted, and events described in precise detail seemed to unfold around her, sometimes with only the slightest delay. The line between her own experiences and the lives captured in the journal blurred, leaving her uncertain which moments belonged to her and which belonged to the shadows of others. Her sketches became more detailed, almost obsessive, as if she could coax the faces from the page into reality through sheer force of will. She often found herself staring at her drawings long after the ink had dried, feeling eyes upon her, feeling recognition and accusation in equal measure. One evening, she lingered over a drawing of a man she had never met, his expression one of quiet despair. She was struck by the intensity of his gaze, as though he could see into her soul through the page. She wrote beside the sketch, trying to make sense of him. A name, perhaps, a place, a fragment of a story that might give him life beyond the dream. As she wrote, she felt a sudden pressure in the room, a subtle weight pressing against her chest, and the shadows along the walls seemed to grow longer, stretching toward her. She glanced up, half expecting to see the figure from her dreams standing silently in the corner. Nothing moved, yet the feeling persisted. A quiet insistence that she was not alone. Sleep became a battleground of memories and visions. She would awaken with her hair damp from sweat, her mind full of faces she could not name and places she could not recognize. Sometimes the journal itself seemed to pulse in response, its pages warm beneath her fingers, as if the book had a heartbeat of its own. She began to feel that the journal was alive, that the stories within it were not static but evolving, shifting in ways that responded to her presence and attention. The faces she sketched were not merely drawings, they were invitations, threads connecting her to lives she had never lived but was now intimately entwined with. One night, a dream carried her to a vast room filled with mirrors, each reflecting a different face, some familiar, some entirely alien. She moved between them, studying each reflection carefully. One mirror caught her attention in particular. The image staring back was unmistakably her own, yet subtly different. The eyes were older, the expression weighted with knowledge and sorrow she had not yet acquired. She reached toward the glass, and as her fingers brushed the surface, the reflection shifted, revealing a scene behind her. A small figure hunched over a journal, pen in hand, surrounded by shadows. She recognized the room, the posture, the very act, and a shiver ran through her. The dream made her question the boundaries of identity, memory, and authorship. Was the journal hers to read, or was she merely replaying the life of someone else, someone who had long since vanished into the forgotten chapters she now uncovered? By morning, the intensity of the dream lingered. She returned to her sketches, attempting to reconcile the faces in her mind with the ones on the page. Each stroke of her pen seemed to summon fragments of memory that were not hers, yet strangely felt like her own. A rhythm began to emerge. Dream, sketch, write, awake, repeat. The journal guided her through it all, offering subtle hints, cryptic passages, and lines of poetry that seemed to unlock new understanding with each reading. She began to feel that the journal's purpose was not merely to recount stories, but to awaken something dormant within her, to reconstruct forgotten lives, and perhaps to reveal a truth that lay beyond the reach of ordinary consciousness. The shadows in her room deepened as the days passed. They no longer felt like mere absences of light, but like entities themselves, silent observers of her work, participants in the unfolding narrative. She would glance toward a corner and think she saw a face from her sketches, eyes following her movements with patient curiosity. And always, the journal lay nearby, its presence magnetic, its pages open, urging her to continue. She understood, on a level that transcended thought, that these were not random dreams. They were deliberate, precise, and meant for her alone. Each face she sketched, each line she wrote, was a bridge between the forgotten and the living, a thread tying her consciousness to a tapestry of hidden memories and untold stories. A particularly vivid dream brought her to a crumbling seaside village, its streets slick with rain and its buildings leaning precariously as though weighed down by years of neglect. She walked through the empty streets, passing shuttered windows and abandoned homes. In the town square stood a figure cloaked in shadows, who turned slowly to reveal a face she had sketched countless times. Recognition and dread coursed through her simultaneously. The figure beckoned silently, guiding her through narrow alleys, up staircases, into rooms filled with journals, letters, and keepsakes. She realized with a sudden clarity that this dream was a map, a reconstruction of forgotten histories that had been hidden, suppressed, or erased. And she understood that her task was not passive. She was meant to follow, to record, to breathe life into these memories so that they might exist again. Days blended into nights, and her waking life became a reflection of the dream world she navigated. Faces surfaced at unexpected moments, a passerby in the street, a child playing in the park, a shadow glimpsed in a dim hallway. She would pause, heart pounding, trying to determine whether these were echoes of her dreams or glimpses of reality bending toward the narrative of the journal. Each encounter reinforced the sense that she was no longer merely reading history. She was participating in its reconstruction. By the end of the week, the accumulation of dreams, sketches, and observations left her both exhilarated and exhausted. She sat amidst scattered notebooks, half-filled pages, and sketches of faces that stared at her with the intensity of remembered life. The journal rested at her side, open and warm, a silent witness to the work she had undertaken. She realized, with a mixture of awe and trepidation, that the stories within it were not merely written, they were alive, waiting to be remembered, waiting for her to give them form. And in that realization came a haunting question. Whose lives were these? Whose memories had she unearthed? And ultimately, was the journal a record of someone else's past, or a reflection of her own forgotten self, waiting to be reclaimed from the depths of time and shadow? The faces continued to come, night after night, dream after dream. She would sketch, write, and observe, each act deepening the connection, weaving herself more tightly into the unseen web of histories, tragedies, and memories. The journal had become a mirror, a key, a guide, and perhaps even a companion. Through it, she glimpsed lives that had been hidden, stories that had been silenced, and truths that were waiting for recognition. And she understood, with a clarity both terrifying and beautiful, that she had become an essential part of this unfolding narrative, an interpreter of forgotten faces, a witness to suppressed secrets, and the reader of unread chapters that demanded to be brought back into the light. The door that opens at midnight. The clock struck 12 with a hollow resonance that reverberated through the quiet of her room. And in that sound, she felt the pull of something inevitable, something both terrifying and impossible to resist. The journal lay open on her desk, its pages flickering as though stirred by a gentle breeze that had no source, and she noticed that certain lines were now glowing faintly, a subtle luminescence along the edges of the words. She leaned closer, her breath catching in her throat, as the letters seemed to rearrange themselves before her eyes, forming sentences she had not read before. Sentences that seemed to speak directly to her. The door waits. Only at midnight does it reveal itself. Step through, and all truths shall unfold. A shiver ran down her spine, half from the chill of the night, half from the recognition of the journal's insistence. She looked around her dimly lit room, the shadows stretching unnaturally, the familiar objects casting elongated, almost human forms on the walls. And then, as if summoned by the text itself, a door appeared where none had been before. It was narrow, with peeling paint and a faint warmth emanating from its edges. It did not belong to the architecture of her apartment. It had no place in her life until now. And yet it was undeniably real. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the handle, a part of her mind urging caution, another part urging surrender. The moment she touched it, the air around her thickened, heavy with the scent of earth and rain, and the familiar room dissolved. She felt a subtle pull in her chest, like the tug of gravity in a world tilted just slightly off its axis. The door swung open with surprising ease, revealing a landscape bathed in a silver twilight that was neither night nor day. Mist rolled along the ground in slow, deliberate currents, curling around ancient trees and crumbling stone walls. The air shimmered with a strange liquid light, and the sound of water somewhere distant carried a soft, melodic undertone that seemed to resonate with her heartbeat. She stepped through, her movements both deliberate and hesitant, and the world shifted around her with each footfall. Shadows twisted and stretched in ways that defied physics, forming fleeting shapes that suggested figures just beyond her perception. There were buildings here, and yet they seemed translucent, as though memories of their existence were imprinted on the landscape rather than their physical forms. Streets led into alleys that looped impossibly back on themselves. Doors appeared and disappeared along walls without rhyme or reason, and the horizon itself seemed to curve, bending gently toward the unknown. She felt a strange exhilaration in the disorientation, a sense that she had entered a space that existed only for her, a stage upon which forgotten memories would play themselves out as she wandered. The journal pulsed softly in her bag, each heartbeat of the pages coinciding with the pulse of the landscape itself. She felt it guiding her, drawing her attention to particular features of the terrain. A fountain with water that shimmered with images of people she had never met. A garden where flowers bloomed in impossible colors that shifted with her gaze. A window reflecting not her own face, but that of a woman she had sketched in dreams just nights before. The journal seemed alive, aware, responding to her presence, its influence shaping the very world she now traversed. She reached for it, and as she opened it, the handwriting seemed to pulse in time with her own thoughts. Words arranging themselves into directions, clues, and fragments of stories that unfolded with both urgency and inevitability in one street. She found a theater, its doors heavy with carved symbols she did not recognize. The air smelled of old wood and candle smoke, familiar yet displaced by the strangeness of the night. She pushed the doors open, and inside she discovered a hall filled with rows of chairs, all empty, all facing a stage where a scene played out as though on an invisible film. There were figures moving in slow, deliberate patterns, faces she knew yet could not place, acting out stories she had glimpsed in dreams, sketches, and journal entries. She watched, mesmerized, as tragedies and joys unfolded simultaneously, the overlapping narratives creating a tapestry of emotion that felt both intimate and incomprehensibly vast. Each figure, each gesture, each whisper of dialogue carried weight, as though the landscape itself remembered every detail and demanded her attention. She realized then that this world was constructed of memories forgotten, suppressed, hidden. Some were her own, fragments of experience she had long since overlooked, reshaped by time and perception. Others belonged to the people she had sketched, the faces that had haunted her dreams, lives that had existed in parallel to her own, now laid bare in surreal clarity. The journal was the key, guiding her through this liminal space, pointing her toward revelations she could neither predict nor fully comprehend. Its influence was subtle, never overt. It did not tell her what to think or how to act, but it coaxed her awareness, shaped her attention, and opened the doors of perception she had not realized existed. Hours are, perhaps days passed without distinction. Time in this realm did not flow linearly. It was pliable, elastic, and responsive to her focus. She moved through corridors where portraits on the walls whispered secrets when she drew near, through gardens where statues blinked and smiled when she turned her gaze. through libraries where the books contained stories of lives she had never lived, yet somehow knew intimately. Every step, every glance, every heartbeat deepened her connection to the journal, to the landscape, to the hidden truths that now seemed just beyond the veil. She began to notice subtle changes in the journal itself. Words shifted when she reread passages, phrases rearranged, and diagrams appeared where none had existed before. Maps of streets, sketches of faces, cryptic symbols that pulsed with light all emerged without conscious effort, as though the journal were responding to the world she now inhabited. It was not merely a book. It was a living document, a companion, and a guide through the surreal geography of memory and imagination. She felt the presence of the hidden figure she had glimpsed before, always on the periphery, patient, observing, sometimes guiding with subtle gestures, sometimes allowing the scene to unfold unimpeded. In one corridor, she discovered a mirror, its surface dark and rippling. She approached cautiously, uncertain of what she might see. Her reflection appeared, yet it was not entirely her own. The eyes were older, wiser, and tinged with sorrow. The expression carried knowledge she had not yet attained. As she watched, the mirror shifted, revealing a different scene behind her reflection. A room filled with scattered journals, letters, and sketches, some hers, some not, all alive with possibility. Figures moved among the pages, interacting, arguing, laughing, grieving, and she realized with a jolt that this was a record not only of the lives contained within the journal, but of the act of remembering itself. The landscape, the shadows, the figures, they were all extensions of memory, each one a manifestation of stories that demanded acknowledgement. The air in the surreal world pulsed with a rhythm she could feel in her chest, a heartbeat that matched the gentle luminescence of the journal. Each step she took seemed preordained, each glance directed, yet she retained the freedom to explore, to question, to follow her intuition. The journal's guidance was not overt. It was a gentle insistence, a reminder that she was not simply a visitor, but a participant, an active interpreter of the memories and stories she encountered. She began to understand that this was the purpose of the door at midnight, to reveal that reality was not a fixed, singular path, but a tapestry woven of countless experiences, some forgotten, some suppressed, some unread. At the center of the landscape, she found another door, smaller, unassuming, and yet radiating a quiet power. It was partially obscured by vines that glimmered with dew and a mist that swirled mysteriously around its frame. The journal pulsed insistently, almost urgently, as if this were the threshold she had been moving toward all along. Her hand shook, and the moment her fingers brushed the cool wood, the mist parted, revealing a vision unlike any she had encountered. Behind the door lay a room filled with lights, falled golden and warmware. Fragments of memory coalesced into clarity. Faces she had sketched, passages from the journal, echoes of dreams, all converged, forming a tableau that made her pulse quicken with recognition and awe. In that room, the hidden truths began to crystallize. She saw patterns in the stories, connections between people, places, and events that had seemed disparate before. Tragedies she had glimpsed in dreams now revealed their causes. Secrets, long buried, whispered their resolutions. And she understood that the journal's purpose was not merely to preserve these stories, but to awaken the observer, the reader, to the hidden web of experience that connected all things. The surreal landscape, the shifting shadows, the door itself, they were tools, thresholds, tests, guiding her toward comprehension, toward acknowledgement, toward revelation. She lingered, absorbing the magnitude of what she witnessed, until a quiet understanding settled within her. The journal had changed, as had she, shaped by the interaction, by the crossing of the threshold, by the willingness to step into a world that defied reason and expectation. The hidden figure appeared one last time, a shadow among shadows, bowing its head in acknowledgement, then dissolving into the ether, as if to say that her journey was far from complete. Yet she had passed an essential step when she finally stepped back through the door at midnight, returning to the familiar contours of her own room. The journal lay open on her desk, warm and pulsing faintly, its pages now brimming with new lines, sketches, and symbols that reflected the landscape she had traversed. She realized with awe that crossing the door had changed everything. The journal was alive, the memories were mutable, and she herself was now an integral part of a narrative that spanned dreams, time, and reality itself. And somewhere deep within her, she felt the pull of the next threshold, the next unread chapter, waiting patiently for the moment she would step forward once more. Threads of reality. The days that followed her crossing through the door at midnight blurred into a strange, almost unbearable continuity. The line between dreams and waking life thinned to a thread so fine it was difficult to determine which moments were real and which belonged to the surreal landscapes of the journal. She began noticing inconsistencies in her surroundings, objects that shifted slightly when she wasn't looking, doors that led to rooms she had never entered, shadows that lingered longer than they should have, and whispers that seemed carried on the edges of her consciousness. Even in the brightest sunlight, the world felt softened, muted, and slightly unreal, as if filtered through the same delicate, dreamlike haze she had come to associate with the journal. It was during one such afternoon, while she was sketching in her notebook, that she noticed a figure standing in the corner of her room. She froze, her hand suspended above the page, as the shadow resolved itself into the shape of a person. Unlike the vague, peripheral figures she had glimpsed in dreams or in the surreal landscape beyond the midnight door, this presence was tangible. Its outline was clear, defined, and it radiated an awareness that seemed to stretch beyond the walls of her apartment. She held her breath, unsure whether to call out, approach, or retreat, yet the figure did not move. It simply watched, silently, with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" The figure did not respond immediately, but the air around her seemed to hum, thick with meaning. Then, slowly, it stepped forward, revealing a face that was both familiar and impossible. It was a reflection of someone she had sketched countless times in her dreams, yet altered, as if the life of the figure had evolved beyond the confines of memory. The eyes stormy, deep, and infinite met hers directly, and she felt a resonance in her chest, a vibration that matched the pulse of the journal itself. "I am the one who remembers what has been forgotten," the figure said at last, its voice neither male nor female, but somewhere between, resonant with both authority and tenderness. "I am the guardian of the unread chapters, the keeper of the threads that weave between dream and reality. You have crossed thresholds that others never do, and now you are bound to the consequences of that knowledge." Her chest tightened. Bound how? What happens if I keep exploring the journal? The figure's gaze seemed to pierce the very walls of perception. The chapters are unread for a reason. To fully explore them is to confront the entirety of memory lives that have been erased, truths that have been hidden, and the inevitability of endings that have no resolution. Each chapter carries a weight, a consequence, and some threads, once pulled, cannot be undone. You will witness events that challenge your understanding of life, death, and the spaces in between. You will confront choices that have no clear morality, and the fabric of your reality will shift in response. She swallowed hard, feeling both fear and fascination. The journal had guided her this far, had revealed truths and memories she had never known, but the warnings carried weight, and yet she could not stop. Even in the presence of the figure, she felt the magnetic pull of the unread chapters, the latent promise of understanding something vast, something beyond the limitations of ordinary life. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, and when she opened them, the figure had moved closer, their presence enveloping her with a sensation of profound inevitability. "Why me?" she asked, voice trembling. "Why am I the one drawn to these threads?" "Because," the figure replied, "you are both observer and participant. The journal does not choose at random. It seeks those who can navigate the convergence of memory and reality, who can bear the weight of what has been suppressed. You carry within you echoes of lives that have intersected with these chapters before, and now you must continue the work that has remained unfinished for countless years. The threads you pull will ripple through lives, through history, through the fabric of existence itself." Her mind spun with the implications. Every dream she had sketched, every face she had recorded, every moment she had witnessed in the surreal landscape beyond the door, these were not isolated phenomena. They were connected, bound together by invisible threads that she was now responsible for unraveling, understanding, and guiding toward resolution. The figure gestured toward the journal, which lay on the desk, its pages glowing faintly, alive with subtle motion. "Open it," the figure said. "Let the threads reveal themselves." She obeyed, her hands shaking as she turned the pages. The words seemed to rearrange themselves, forming a map of sorts. Locations, people, events, and emotions interconnected by lines of light that pulsed faintly, like veins carrying the lifeblood of memory. Faces from her dreams blinked in the margins, their expressions shifting in accordance with the narrative unfolding. It was no longer merely a journal. It was a living diagram of reality itself, a network of threads connecting past, present, and future in ways that defied conventional understanding. As she traced a line connecting a woman she had seen in dreams to a forgotten alley she had walked in reality, a memory surfaced, one she could not have known. The woman's life had ended tragically, hidden from records, erased from history, and yet, through the journal, she could bear witness could restore a sense of presence to a life that had been lost. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing against her chest, yet also a profound exhilaration. She was now an active participant in the weaving of memory, a guardian of threads that had been abandoned for decades. The figure stepped closer again. Do you see now? These threads are fragile. Some lives are entwined so tightly that even a single misstep, and yet they must be traced, acknowledged, and remembered. Each chapter you explore, each memory you uncover, changes the pattern of reality. You are both creator and observer. You cannot escape the consequences of what you learn, and yet you cannot ignore them either. She nodded slowly, absorbing the enormity of the task. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and yet irresistibly compelling. Every encounter she had had, every sketch she had made, every dream she had recorded it, had all led to this moment. This understanding that the journal was not merely a collection of stories, but a conduit through which the forgotten, suppressed, and erased could speak again. She felt a surge of determination, an acknowledgement that she could no longer remain passive. The threads demanded engagement, demanded recognition, and she would meet that demand. However heavy the burden, hours, or perhaps days, passed as she worked through the network of memories laid bare in the journal. Each connection revealed new insights, a tragedy prevented, a secret unveiled, a forgotten face restored to presence. Yet with each revelation came tension, a reminder that reality itself was malleable, and that her actions carried weight beyond her comprehension. Sometimes she would glimpse a face in the street that matched a sketch, and for a moment she would hesitate, unsure if she was observing reality or reading it through the lens of the journal. The threads intertwined with her waking life so subtly that she could no longer distinguish cause from effect, dream from fact, narrative from existence. One night, as she pored over a particularly dense cluster of connections, the figure spoke again. "There are chapters still unread," it said, its voice gentle yet commanding. "Some carry joy, some sorrow, some unspeakable loss. You will face lives that were cut short, secrets that were deliberately hidden, and memories that have waited decades to be acknowledged. The threads are delicate, yet persistent. They will not wait forever." She felt a chill run down her spine, a mixture of anticipation and fear. She understood, now more clearly than ever, why the chapters had remained unread. They carried consequences too heavy for ordinary minds, too intricate for those unwilling or unprepared to navigate the fragile boundaries between memory, life, and reality. And yet she also recognized that avoidance was impossible. She had been chosen, drawn to these threads by forces she did not fully comprehend, and the only path forward was engagement. No matter how perilous or disorienting, the journal pulsed again, as if affirming her resolve. Words shifted, lines of light connected new faces and events, and she realized that the threads extended far beyond what she had seen. Lives intersected in ways she had not anticipated. Patterns emerged that hinted at secrets even deeper than she could perceive, and the presence of the figure remained a subtle, guiding force, always on the edge of her awareness. She had crossed thresholds before, but this chapter threads of reality was different. Here, the consequences were immediate, palpable, woven directly into the fabric of her waking life. A sudden realization struck her. The unread chapters were not merely stories. They were tests, thresholds, invitations to witness, remember, and act. Each connection she traced, each life she acknowledged, reshaped the world in subtle yet profound ways. The journal had chosen her not merely to observe, but to participate, to navigate the labyrinth of memory and consequence, to follow threads that others had left dangling for decades, untied and incomplete. She felt both awe and trepidation at the magnitude of the task, yet a fierce determination rose within her. She could not turn back. She would trace the threads, uncover the hidden truths, and bear witness to what had been silenced. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through her window, she had completed the most intricate mapping yet. Lines of connection shimmered faintly on the pages of the journal. Faces blinked knowingly from the margins, and the network of threads extended outward, touching lives, memories, and events she could only begin to comprehend. The figure had vanished, leaving her alone with the journal. Yet she felt its presence lingering, a silent encouragement to continue. She understood in that quiet moment that her life had irrevocably merged with the lives contained within the unread chapters. The threads of reality had been revealed to her, and with them came responsibility, insight, and the promise of truths yet to be discovered. And though the consequences were unknown, though the paths were perilous, and though the boundaries between dream and reality had never seemed more fragile, she felt a profound certainty. She was meant to follow these threads to their conclusion, to uncover the stories that demanded acknowledgement, and to bring the unread chapters into the light. Closing the unread chapters. The night was quiet, almost unnervingly so, as she sat at her desk, the journal open before her. Its pages seemed heavier than ever, not in weight, but in presence, as though each word carried the accumulated weight of dreams, memories, and lives that had intersected with her own. She traced the lines of text with trembling fingers, recalling the threads she had followed, the doors she had crossed, the faces she had sketched, and the landscapes she had wandered in sleep. Every encounter, every vision, every whisper had led her here to this moment, where the choice she had long sensed would come demanded clarity. She could feel it pressing against her, the duality of decision. One path offered release, a return to ordinary life, to the comfortable patterns of reality she had known before the journal entered her world. It promised a forgetting, a return to normalcy, the soft erasure of the uncanny, the undoing of threads that had bound her to lives, memories and truths that were not hers, so perhaps were, in ways she had yet to understand. To step away would be to close the journal, to place it back on the dusty shelf where it might gather time and shadow, untouched by human consciousness once more. It would be relief, simplicity, safety, but the other patha, one she felt pulsing beneath her ribcage, was far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more alluring. To embrace the unknown truth was to accept the responsibility the journal had woven into her life. It was to trace the threads to their conclusions, to witness the entirety of stories that had been left unread, to bear witness to the forgotten, the suppressed, and the hidden. It was to allow herself to be transformed by knowledge, by memory, by the convergence of dream and reality. She could not deny the pull, for it was no longer merely a curiosity. It was a resonance, a calling that seemed to originate not from the journal alone, but from deep within her own being. Her thoughts drifted back to the faces she had drawn, each one a fragment of a life she had glimpsed through the journal's lens. There was the young woman with storm-cloud eyes and the crooked smile, whose tragedies had haunted her dreams. There were figures of men, children, and elders she had never met, yet who had existed fully in some realm of memory that intersected with hers. The weight of their existence pressed on her. To close the unread chapters would be to forget them, to consign their lives, their joys, their sorrows, to oblivion. And yet, to continue would be to live in a state of perpetual uncertainty, to allow the boundaries of reality and dream to shift with each heartbeat, to carry the burden of stories not entirely her own. She reached for her sketchbook, fingers trembling, and flipped through the pages she had filled over countless nights. Each drawing, each line of ink, each annotation was imbued with life. The sketches seemed to breathe under her touch, the eyes following her movements, the expressions shifting subtly as if responding to her hesitation. She realized that the act of recording had created a form of permanence. She had brought existence to the ephemeral, given presence to what had been hidden, and she understood, suddenly and profoundly, that this was why she had been chosen to be the witness, the recorder, the keeper of the unread chapters. A soft luminescence began to emanate from the journal, gentle at first, then stronger, pulsating with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. Words shifted on the page, forming new passages that seemed to speak directly to her. The choice is yours. Neither path is wrong. Neither path is safe. What you decide will shape not only your life, but the lives of all those who exist between memory and reality. Some chapters must remain unread, yet even unread, they shape the fabric of the world. She closed her eyes, letting the words resonate within her, allowing herself to be swept into the current of feeling that had guided her since the first night. She discovered the journal in the dusty attic. She thought of the doors she had crossed at midnight, the surreal landscapes where memories played out like films, the hidden figure who had guided her, and the threads she had traced across lives, dreams, and realities. She felt the magnitude of the choice pressing against her mind and body, yet a strange calm settled over her as she exhaled slowly. Opening her eyes, she made her decision. She would embrace the unknown truth. She could not undo what had begun, could not sever herself from the lives and memories that had been entrusted to her. Closing the journal would be an act of forgetting, and she could not bring herself to forget not. When the faces, the voices, the moments she had witnessed demanded acknowledgement, demanded life, she placed her hand firmly on the cover, feeling the subtle warmth of its pulse, and whispered, "I accept. I will see it through." The room seemed to dissolve around her, shadows and light blending into a silvery haze as the journal guided her consciousness outward once more. She felt herself being lifted, carried along threads of memory and existence that stretched in all directions, weaving past, present, and possibility into a tapestry that defied conventional understanding. The faces she had drawn, the landscapes she had wandered, The moments she had recorded, they converged around her, swirling in a vortex of sensation, emotion, and understanding. Each life, each memory, each unread chapter became tangible, alive, and fully present in the space she now inhabited. The hidden figure appeared, standing at the edge of the convergence, watching silently. Their form both familiar and impossible. They inclined their head in acknowledgement, a subtle affirmation that her choice was understood and that the path she had embraced was correct. Though fraught with complexity, the figure did not speak, yet she felt their guidance in every movement of the threads, in every pulse of the luminescent lines that connected faces and events, memories and possibilities. She realized that the figure was not a guide in the conventional sense, but a witness, a companion, a silent partner in the act of remembering and acknowledging what had been left unread. She began moving through the tapestry, tracing threads with her fingers, observing how lives intersected, watching the interplay of consequence and memory unfold. Some threads led to joy moments of reunion, discovery, and profound connection. Others led to sorrow tragedies, secrets, and losses long buried. And some threads, delicate and elusive, remained just beyond her grasp, hinting at possibilities she could not yet perceive. She understood that not all chapters would be read, not all lives fully reconciled, and that some mysteries were meant to persist in shadow, shaping the fabric of existence without resolution. The process was both exhausting and exhilarating. Hours or perhaps years, for time had become malleable in this space, passed as she worked, tracing threads, witnessing lives, recording faces, and absorbing the interwoven narratives of existence. The journal pulsed softly in her hands, alive with the energy of memory and observation, guiding her, affirming her role, yet never dictating her actions. She felt the weight of responsibility, the thrill of insight, and the profound intimacy of connection with beings whose lives she had never otherwise known. Eventually, she reached the final threads she could trace, the last intersections of lives, memories, and possibilities that were accessible to her in this convergence. She paused, her hand resting on the glowing pages of the journal, feeling a profound sense of closure and continuity. The unread chapters remained faint and distant, like stars on the edge of perceptions, some destined never to be revealed. Yet their influence pervasive, shaping the structure of memory and reality itself. She understood that some dreams were meant to remain unread, yet even in their unread state, they left impressions, echoes, and consequences that reverberated through existence. With a final, deliberate exhale, she closed the journal. The luminescence faded, the threads of memory and reality settling into a quiet, harmonious pattern. The room around her solidified once more, ordinary in appearance, yet forever altered in perception. She felt the weight of what she had witnessed, the lives she had acknowledged, and the truths she had embraced, and she knew that she had been irrevocably changed. The experience had reshaped her understanding of memory, identity, and the interplay between dream and reality. She placed the journal on the shelf, dust motes catching the faint light of dawn. She could have left it closed forever, forgotten its existence, and returned to the simplicity of ordinary life. But she did not. The journal, the unread chapters, the threads of memory, these were now part of her, woven into the fabric of her identity. Even as she moved through her waking world, she carried with her the echoes of the lives she had witnessed, the faces she had drawn, and the memories she had acknowledged. Some dreams remained unread, lingering in shadow, but their impact persisted, subtle yet profound, shaping her perception and her understanding of the hidden complexities of existence. She stood by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight filter through the glass, illuminating the room in warm, golden hues. The world appeared ordinary, yet she knew it was not the same. She had crossed thresholds, traced threads, witnessed lives that had been erased, and embraced truths that most could not perceive. The journal had guided her, the hidden figure had observed her, and the unread chapters had revealed themselves, in part, leaving her with a bittersweet understanding. Some mysteries were eternal, some stories incomplete, yet even in incompletion, there was beauty, meaning, and the profound connection between observer and observed. And in that quiet moment, she understood that her journey was not one of endings, but of awareness. She could no longer live as though the threads of memory, dream, and reality were separate. They were intertwined, delicate, and powerful, shaping the world in subtle, profound ways. She felt a sense of peace, tempered with longing, for she knew that the unread chapters would always linger, ghosts of possibility, invitations to wonder, and reminders of the intricate, infinite tapestry of life. With a deep, steadying breath, she closed her eyes, allowing herself to feel the resonance of the threads one final time. The journal rested silently, waiting, patient as it had always been. And though she would not read every chapter, she would carry their essence with her, in memory, in perception, in the quiet understanding that some truths, even unread, shape the course of existence. The world outside her window was ordinary, yet it shimmered with hidden complexity, a reflection of the tapestry she had witnessed and become a part of. She smiled softly, a mixture of sorrow, awe, and contentment in her expression. The unread chapters remained just beyond reach, but their impact would linger, subtly altering her life, her understanding, and her consciousness. She was changed, irrevocably, by the threads she had traced, the memories she had embraced, and the truths she had accepted. And in that change, there was both closure and continuation, a bittersweet balance between what had been revealed and what remained hidden, a final acknowledgement that some dreams are never meant to be fully read, yet they echo endlessly in the lives they touch. You've wandered through the unread chapters of forgotten dreams, and perhaps somewhere between the words, you found a quiet place to rest tonight. May your own dreams write their gentle stories, the ones you'll read only in your heart. Thank you for listening to Whispers of the Night. If you haven't already, remember to follow or subscribe so the next dream finds you again. Good night, dreamer. Sleep softly.